Jeff was the most sought-after bachelor in town. At 32, he possessed all the qualities that made women's eyes shine. Young, handsome, well-mannered, from a good family, wealthy and competent. With his piercing blue eyes, always well-styled brown hair, and a smile capable of melting hearts, Jeff seemed to have walked out of the pages of a modern fairy tale. As the CEO of his family's company, one of the largest construction firms in the country, Jeff not only inherited a fortune, but also proved his worth by impressively expanding the business in recent years. His intelligence and strategic vision were admired in the business world, while his natural elegance and charm made him the center of attention at any social event. However, behind the facade of a successful and desired man, Jeff concealed a deep fatigue. He was exhausted by the superficiality that all the attention attracted. Always surrounded by people who saw him as a trophy to be won, Jeff longed for genuine connections, for someone who would see him beyond status and bank accounts. Coming from an influential family, Jeff was constantly chosen to represent it at social events. It was on these occasions that he found himself surrounded by a legion of suitors, with parents casually trying to push their daughters in his direction. The approaches happened at the most inopportune and bizarre moments. One time, while getting ready for a workout at the gym he frequented, Jeff was caught off guard in the locker room by an old family acquaintance. The man, completely ignoring the fact that Jeff was wearing only a towel around his waist, insisted on talking about his newly graduated granddaughter who had just returned from a trip abroad. "Jeff, my boy, great to see you here," exclaimed the gentleman, approaching excitedly, while Jeff tried in vain to cover himself better with the tiny towel. "You know, my Isabel just returned from a period living abroad. She graduated in economics, you know. A brilliant young woman. I'm sure you two would have plenty to talk about." Jeff, embarrassed and struggling to maintain his composure, replied with a forced smile. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate the interest, but perhaps we could talk about this in a more clothed occasion." The man, finally realizing the situation, laughed awkwardly and stepped back, leaving Jeff relieved but also irritated by yet another clumsy attempt to find him a potential match. On another even more inappropriate occasion, Jeff found himself at the funeral of a distant uncle, trying to offer his condolences to the grieving family, when he was approached by a middle-aged woman. With a smile that seemed completely out of place in that somber environment, she began to advertise her daughter. "Jeff, dear, what a sad moment this is, isn't it?" she began in a falsely mournful tone. "But life goes on, and we must think of the future. Speaking of which, do you know my Melissa? She's a doctor, you know. So intelligent and dedicated. And beautiful, too. I'm sure you two would get along very well." Jeff, stunned by the woman's lack of tact, merely mumbled an excuse and quickly stepped away, feeling nauseated at the thought that even a funeral could become an opportunity to try to arrange a marriage for him. These experiences only reinforced Jeff's conviction that this was not how he would find true love. He longed for something real, for someone who saw him as he truly was, not as a conquest or a means of social ascent. On a Friday night, Jeff found himself at yet another one of those dull events he so detested. The ballroom of a luxurious hotel was elegantly decorated for a charity dinner. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light, creating an atmosphere of opulence. Round tables covered with white linen cloths were arranged throughout the room, each adorned with an elaborate floral arrangement at the center. Jeff moved through the environment, alternating between forced smiles and perfunctory handshakes. He wore a tailor-made suit that accentuated his athletic figure. Despite his impeccable appearance, he felt uncomfortable and out of place. Every few steps, he was approached by an acquaintance insisting on introducing him to a daughter, niece, or single friend. Jeff responded politely, but his smile no longer seemed sincere. He was tired, frustrated, and eager to find an excuse to leave. It was at this moment of discouragement that fate decided to intervene unexpectedly. While trying to dodge yet another unwanted introduction, Jeff felt something wet and warm on his back. Turning around quickly, he was met with a young waitress, eyes wide with panic, holding an empty tray. At her feet, shards of a crystal glass and a pool of red wine were spreading over the marble floor. "Oh my God! I'm sorry," exclaimed the waitress, her face red with embarrassment. She quickly grabbed a napkin from a nearby table and began trying to clean Jeff's suit, frantically rubbing the expensive fabric. Jeff, surprisingly, did not feel annoyed. There was something refreshing about the young woman's genuine mortification, so different from the calculated attitudes he was used to. "It's okay, it was just an accident," he said, gently pushing her hands away from his suit. "Don't worry." The waitress looked at him, her brown eyes shining with suppressed tears. "I'm really sorry. It's my first day and I think I just quit, didn't I?" Jeff couldn't help but smile at her forlorn expression. "Not if I can help it. It was an accident. These things happen." At that moment, Jeff noticed that several people were watching them. Feeling uncomfortable with the attention, he decided to retreat to the bathroom to try and improve the state of his clothes. Upon leaving the bathroom, Jeff spotted the dreaded Mrs. Margaret approaching. Known for her persistence in trying to arrange marriages for her granddaughters, she was a figure Jeff avoided at all costs. Knowing he would spend many minutes trying to politely extricate himself from her, Jeff decided to act quickly. With the agility of someone used to dodging unwanted situations, Jeff discreetly slipped among the guests, heading to a balcony he had noticed earlier. Upon arriving there, he breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the fresh night air on his face. It was then that he realized he wasn't alone. The clumsy waitress was there, leaning on the railing, gazing absently at the stars. "Have you given up the waitress job?" he asked humorously, catching the young woman's attention. She turned, startled. "Oh, you scared me. I'm on a break," she explained, a shy smile forming on her lips. "I'm sorry again, it's my first day at this job. I needed some money to help with my postgraduate expenses, but I think I started on the wrong foot." Jeff laughed, a genuine sound that even surprised himself. The young woman returned the smile, seeming to relax a bit. "I'm Jeff," he said, extending his hand. "Grace," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. Grace began rummaging through the pockets of her uniform. "I'll give you my phone number so you can let me know the cost of cleaning the suit," she said, finally finding a crumpled piece of paper, the back of a supermarket receipt, and jotting down her number. Jeff found the situation incredibly refreshing. It was evident that Grace had no idea who he was, and this delighted him. He took the paper and put it in his pocket, feeling a genuine curiosity about this awkward and interesting figure. "So, what do you study?" he asked, leaning on the railing next to her. This simple question sparked a lively and pleasant conversation. Grace talked about her master's degree in marine biology, her eyes shining with enthusiasm as she described her research project on coral reef conservation. Jeff found himself completely engaged, asking questions and sharing his own experiences of traveling to places with fascinating marine ecosystems. Time passed without them noticing, the conversation flowing naturally from one subject to another. They talked about books, movies, places they would like to visit. Jeff was surprised to realize how much fun he was having, something he hadn't experienced in years at a social event. "I have to get back to work, or I'll be fired on my first day," Grace finally said, looking at the clock reluctantly. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Jeff." He watched her walk back to the hall, a playful smile on his lips. For the first time in a long while, Jeff wasn't willing to endure more moments of false cordiality. He decided to leave, taking with him the memory of that unexpected and invigorating conversation. When he arrived home, a penthouse apartment overlooking the city centre, Jeff removed his stained suit and noticed the paper with Grace's number in his pocket. He placed it on the bedside table. In the days that followed, Jeff found himself constantly remembering Grace. The way she gestured animatedly while talking about her work, the sparkle in her eyes when she laughed at a silly joke he had made, the carefree way she tossed her hair back. It was refreshing. It was real. After a week of hesitating, Jeff finally decided to call her. He picked up the crumpled paper and dialed the number, feeling an anxiety he hadn't experienced since his teenage years. "Hello?" Grace's voice sounded on the other end, not recognizing him. "Hi, Grace. It's Jeff, from the event last week. Do you remember me?" "The guy with the wine-stained suit," he said, trying to sound casual. "Jeff." "Of course I remember," she replied, the surprise evident in her voice. "So, how much did the suit cleaning cost?" Jeff laughed. "Actually, you don't need to worry about that. But if you really want to pay your debt, how about a coffee?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Jeff feared he had been too direct. But then Grace replied, a smile audible in her voice. "You know that's the most interesting payment proposal I've ever received. I accept." They agreed to meet at a cafe near the university where Grace studied. It was an informal place, full of students, with rustic wooden tables and an irresistible aroma of freshly ground coffee in the air. Jeff arrived first, dressed in casual clothes, jeans, a t-shirt and a light jacket. He sat at a table near the window watching the movement on the street. When he saw Grace walk through the cafe door, Jeff was momentarily breathless. She looked beautiful in a simple and natural way. Her long brown hair fell loosely over her shoulders, framing a face with soft freckles. She wore a light summer dress, with a floral print and low sandals. As she walked towards him, Jeff had the impression that the world around him disappeared, like in a movie scene. "Hi," said Grace, smiling shyly as she sat down. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." "Not at all," Jeff replied, returning the smile. "I'm glad you came." The conversation flowed naturally, as if they were old friends reconnecting. They talked about their days, about books they were reading, about places in the city they liked to visit. Jeff was surprised by how much he was opening up, sharing stories from his childhood and dreams for the future that he had never shared with anyone. The hours passed without them noticing. The coffee cooled in their cups, forgotten as they laughed at funny stories and eagerly discussed a variety of topics. Jeff felt a lightness and lack of pressure that he hadn't experienced in a long time. With Grace, he was just Jeff, not the CEO, not the most eligible bachelor in the city, just himself. That first meeting at the coffee shop was just the beginning. In the following weeks, Jeff and Grace saw each other frequently, always in simple and unpretentious places that she loved. One day it was a picnic in the city park with sandwiches prepared by Grace. On another, they watched a B-horror movie in an old theatre, laughing together at the absurd scenes. Jeff had mentioned that he ran the family business, but Grace had no idea of the extent of his wealth and influence. To her, he was just Jeff, the fun and kind guy she was falling in love with. And Jeff was definitely falling in love too. Each moment with Grace made him feel more alive. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh like no one else, and above all, saw him as he really was. After 2 months of dates and endless conversations, Jeff knew he was in love. He wanted to share everything with Grace, including the part of his life he had kept secret until then. He decided to invite her to a dinner with his family. On the night of the dinner, Jeff came to pick up Grace from her small apartment shared with 2 college roommates. She was nervous, constantly adjusting the simple dress she had chosen for the occasion. "What if they don't like me?" she asked, biting her lower lip. Jeff smiled, taking her hand. "They will love you, just as much as I do." When they arrived at Jeff's family mansion, Grace was amazed. The imposing building, with its meticulously maintained gardens and the entrance guarded by an ornate gate, was like a palace out of a fairy tale. "Jeff," she whispered, her eyes wide, "you didn't tell me your family lived in a castle." It was at that moment that Grace began to understand who Jeff really was. As they were received by a uniformed servant and escorted through luxurious halls, the reality of the situation became clear. During dinner, served in a dining room larger than Grace's entire apartment, she learned more about the family business, their social connections, the fortune they managed. Grace felt small, out of place in that world of wealth and power. After dinner, while they walked through the illuminated gardens, Grace finally expressed her fears. "Jeff, I don't belong to this world. You are amazing, but we are from such different realities. How could this work?" Jeff paused, turning to face her. His eyes shone with an intensity that made Grace's heart race. "Grace," he said, taking her hands in his, "you belong to my heart, and that's all that matters. Before meeting you, I was lost in this world of appearances and expectations. You brought me back to life, reminded me of who I truly am and what really matters." Tears glistened in Grace's eyes as she absorbed Jeff's words. "But your family, your world." "My family will love you as soon as they truly get to know you, just as I love you," Jeff interrupted. "And as for my world, well, how about we build our own world together? One that combines the best of both of our universes." Grace smiled through her tears, feeling her heart racing like never before. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. That night, under the stars and surrounded by the scent of the garden flowers, Jeff and Grace sealed their commitment with a tender and passionate kiss. It was the beginning of a new journey, one that promised challenges but also love, understanding, and the joy of two souls who had finally found their match. Jeff, the most sought-after bachelor in town, had finally found the true love he always knew existed. Not in lavish halls or exclusive events, but in the sincere smile and generous heart of a clumsy waitress who had spilled wine on his expensive suit. And at that moment, he knew he wouldn't trade this happiness for anything in the world. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.